Welcome to Tech Trends. Tech Trends is a podcast series that provides perspective on the latest trends in technology, fintech, and digital. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the emergence of 5G technologies, what it is, how it works, when it's coming, and how it has the potential to fundamentally change business and open up new markets. I'm Anish Bhimani, Chief Information Officer of Commercial Banking at JPMorgan Chase. And joining me today is Marco Pistoia, Director of FLAIR, the Future Lab for Applied Research and Engineering at JPMorgan Chase & Company. Marco, welcome to Tech Trends.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anish.
So Marco, everywhere we look, we're reminded of the power of 5G and how it's going to transform the world. For people that aren't familiar with it, can you explain what it is and how it works?
Sure. Yes, 5G is the fifth generation mobile network. That's what the G stands for, generation. It's a new global wireless standard. You know, we have seen 1G, 2G, 3G, and 4G. We now are at the fifth generation. Technically speaking, what 5G is based on is very short wavelengths and very high frequency. But what this translates into is a lot of data can be transmitted over shorter distances with respect to 4G. So we are going to have a lot of data, but shorter distances. So a lot of new technologies can leverage this amount of data that can be transmitted. We have speed, we have consistency, we have high availability, and we have low latency. So the delay is very short, the delay of communication. The shorter distances are going to be a problem that is being taken care of because, of course, 5G providers need to install more towers to cover the regions and so on. So 4G is powerful, but it has almost reached like saturation. That's why 5G is now coming into place, and it's bringing multi-gigabits per second of communication, very low latency, more reliability, massive network capacity, increased availability, and of course, the ability of many devices. We're talking about billions of devices to be connected at the same time. We're not talking just about mobile devices like our cell phones or our tablets, but we're talking about IoT, Internet of Things devices.
So you mentioned before that we've been on a journey here. It's the fifth generation. Can you walk us through a little bit of the history from 1G up to 5G?
Sure. Yes. It's almost like interesting to see that each one of these technology lasted for about 10 years, like a decade each. So 1G, in fact, was introduced in 1979, and it lasted until about like 1990, so about 11 years. And of course, nothing really ends exactly like, for example, even 4G didn't end today, like there is always an overlap. So 1G, like it's almost like prehistory. It only had 24 kilobits per second. The signal was analog, and it pretty much supported only voice. You know, you could only make phone calls. Then 2G was introduced at the beginning of the 90s, and it covered the whole decade. And here we actually jumped to 64 kilobits per second. And the signal was finally digital, and it supported also text messages. 3G, that's what actually came in the year 2000 and lasted for another decade. Here we're talking about 144 kilobits per second, like as things evolved, we even reached like 2 megabits per second. With the 3G, there was support for video calls, IP telephony, mobile web access, and so on. Now, 4G is the one that we have all been using in the last decade, from 2010 until 2020. We can go from 100 megabits per second to 1 gigabit per second. And with 4G, we have seen, not only, of course, voice call, telephone calls, and text messages, but also mobile multimedia, higher security, better battery usage. And so finally, we are in the area of 5G. Now we're talking about tens of gigabits per second. Another thing to notice is the latency. so the delay in which data is received. This is crucial when using technologies with like mobile devices and sensors. So in 3G, the latency was 100 milliseconds. And now with 5G, it's 1 millisecond. So it's really real time. Like the delay is totally unnoticeable. And with 5G, we can actually have like an incredible range of new technologies enabled, like smarter cities, smarter schools, smarter offices, smarter cars, and so on. Everything is thanks to this new technology.
So it's interesting, if you think about that, each one of those generations sort of enabled a new capability or a new method of communication, right? 2G really is what made cell phones ubiquitous around the world, right? If you think about it, 3G is what started making mobile browsing ubiquitous around the world. 4G started to make video calls ubiquitous around the world. How do we think about 5G, how it's already changed things, and what it means for businesses and consumers?
Exactly. So with 5G, I think things go beyond smartphones and tablets. With 5G, the new thing is IoT, Internet of Things. So the idea that billions of smart devices, smart sensors are now connected to the network and integrated with each other, interacting in real time. There is so much that can be done with this power at this point, particularly in the area of AR, VR, augmented reality and virtual reality. We can now see how it's possible, for example, even for a bank like JPMorgan Chase, but for many other industries, to take advantage of 5G to do remote learning, remote meeting, remote assistance of customers, remote onboarding of new employees. And with IoT, you can actually have better working environments. Like the offices where we work every day can now become smart offices. You can have, and some of these things already exist, but with 5G, they can become much more powerful. You can have like sensors and cameras computing how many people are in each environment. If there is any emergency, people can be routed not only to the closest exit, but to the safest exit. And if that becomes overly crowded, then the IoT system can route people to the second closest and safest exit that is not so crowded as the first one. So there are so many capabilities, so many new advantages that can take place. Also, for example, in the automotive industry, we have now self-driving cars, but with 5G, there is an expectation that smart points of contact can be installed in petrol stations, or even in like when there is a stoplight. At that point, cars can load a massive amount of data, or the cars can communicate with each other, so that, for example, every car can communicate with the car ahead of itself, and then recursively every car can do that. So there is almost like a domino effect in a positive way. If there is any emergency, all the cars can communicate back through the car coming behind, so that there is much more safety and security for the people driving or being driven by these smart cars.
So basically what you're describing is a much more highly networked world, right? Where you can get a lot more data from sensors and make decisions about that, feeding things like machine learning algorithms, other things like that. But you can also transmit data to a lot more places to enable, remote devices or autonomous, vehicles to sort of make decisions and act on that data, right? Which opens up a lot of opportunities.
Yes, Anish, I agree with you. This is like a total, like a revolutionary time, basically in the history of mobile communications. There are so many new opportunities, not only for like end users having like their cell phones, but for businesses to take advantage of this new technology that allows for real-time communication and integration of new devices.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that have made the analogy that 4G was about ubiquitously enabling consumer applications. So things like whether for us it's online banking or mobile banking, excuse me, or mobile entertainment or things like that. And what 4G did to consumers, 5G is going to do to corporates, right? There's a lot of people that say it could take the place of wired networks. You could, opens up a lot of opportunities with real estate and things like that as well. Can you talk about what kind of opportunities, like you were saying before, that 5G does create for corporates, and maybe what the next 5 years might look like?
Absolutely. First of all, I think in this space of AR VR, this technology really requires very reliable and fast networks with very high availability. So we don't expect, of course, to be in an AR VR environment and have a disruption. AR VR can be used to save massive amounts of money in terms of, for example, saving on travel expenses. You can have support people, for example, supporting your customers or your employees sitting in another country and serving the teams in remote locations as well. You can have remote classes, but not like using a meeting or something like that. It can be like an embedded experience in which you really feel like you are in a classroom with your teachers. You have a whiteboard, and it's exactly like being in school in person. So all these things are going to revolutionize like the way business is done. The most important thing to notice is that with 5G, AR, VR, and IoT are going to change the way we work on a daily basis in our offices, and it's going to revolutionize the way in which we interact with our customers. It's like I think 5G, as you mentioned before, that's the difference between 5G and 4G. 4G was mostly for consumers, and 5G is for consumers and for businesses. It's going to be a total change of experience, and fortunately, I think it will also generate savings because we are not going to have to travel so often anymore.
Yeah, let's change directions a little bit. So 5G obviously is a very forward-looking kind of a technology. You lead FLAIR for JPMorgan Chase, as I said, the future lab for applied research and engineering, and bring I think, a new perspective to banking. As I recall, I think when we were speaking, I think you have over 200 patents, so you clearly have a view on what's coming in the future. Tell us a little bit about the FLAIR program and what it means.
Yes, Anish, as you mentioned, FLAIR is the future lab for applied research and engineering at JPMorgan Chase. And the A in FLAIR stands for applied, which means our research is totally driven by the business use cases of the firm. We don't do anything unless it's necessary for JPMorgan Chase to solve problems that our partners in the bank have not been able to solve yet. We're also collaborating with universities and with other partners in the industry because we want our research to be totally aligned with the state of the art of the scientific field. In FLAIR, we already have 5 projects, all forward-looking, all frontier technologies. We have Service Mesh, for example, which is a technology in cloud networking that supports hybrid cloud environments. We have confidential computing, which increases the level of security of data, security and privacy of data in clouds. And then we have quantum computing. Quantum is really like a revolutionary technology. Quantum computers promise to beat classical computers in everything that we do in our daily life. So with quantum computers, we will be able to solve problems that are not solvable today. The only challenge with the quantum computing is that it will also break today's cryptography. So we're working also towards alternative forms of encryption that are quantum resistant. And then we have 2 projects that are really close to 5G. and these are IoT, Internet of Things, and AR, VR. So with these two projects, as I mentioned, we really want to change the way we interact with our customers and the way we work on a daily basis. And that's where 5G really plays a crucial role.
So the type of work that you're thinking about with 5G, talk a little bit more about the Internet of Things. And the other term that gets thrown around a lot is edge computing, which a lot of our listeners may not quite understand. They've heard it, but how does that relate to what we're talking about today?
For IoT, it's very important that our new business environments, so the way we interact with our customers, the way our offices are equipped, allow us to really work in smarter business environments. So there are so many things that a 5G enabled office can do for us. For example, safety, like having sensors detecting when situations like older people suddenly migrate from one area of the building to another, or as everybody knows, like even the problem of redirecting people towards security exits and so on. Then we have the issue of edge computing. This is really important. So edge computing is basically like a combination of several artificial intelligence technologies that happen like in a decentralized way. So for example, like at JPMorgan Chase, we have branches all over the place. It's important that a lot of the artificial intelligence takes place right there at the branch, as opposed to in a centralized location where all the computations have to take place. So there are two advantages that we can see when we do edge computing. One is that, of course, we can avoid the latency caused by the data transitioning back and forth. We can actually perform artificial intelligence right there at the location. And the other is that we avoid basically overly loading like a central computer with all these data going back and forth and all the computation that needs to take place. So with 5G technology, some of this can be streamlined. In a sense, it's possible now to even afford more communication between the edge location and the central location, because the technology is there, the bandwidth is there, the latency is decreased. And so 5G allows for better alignment of the artificial intelligence taking place on the edge with the central location that, of course, has more data coming from other branches, other places, and everything can be integrated in a better way.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, it feels like every decade or so, we're going through a little bit of a pendulum swing, right? So go back 50 years ago and we had when computing power was very expensive and we had, mainframe centric computing and timeshare and other things like that. And at the edge, you just had a terminal it was a dumb terminal that just sent instructions back and forth. And then, then we migrated to client server as PCs became much more ubiquitous and powerful, and there was a lot more being done locally. And then as the internet took off, we moved back towards a web and cloud-based model where all of the computing was centralized. And now as networking gets so powerful, we're moving back to be able to do a lot more on the desk. But each of those builds on the other, and it just enables a lot more powerful applications, it sounds like.
Absolutely. So there is no such a thing as 5G eliminating the need for edge computing, but in reality, it's just augmenting the potential of edge computing, because of course, a central location has more data. So it's important to synchronize what's happening at the edge with the central knowledge. So 5G allows for faster synchronization and more frequent synchronization. But we definitely want to continue to work on edge computing technologies.
So Marco, we've been hearing about 5G for a while, and it's only recently that it's starting to become more of a reality. So I think it was in September and October of 2020 that Apple, Samsung, other folks have started announcing the availability of 5G devices, and a lot of the network providers are now advertising the availability of 5G. So is 5G really here, or when is it going to be available more broadly, not just in big cities, but as you said, 5G is dependent on much more towers being placed. How far are we from that becoming a reality and ubiquitous?
So this is actually a very good question because that's what everybody wants to know. First of all, I would like to say more transmitters are needed because as I mentioned, 5G is a very powerful technology, but the radius of communication is much shorter than it is in 4G. So in order to cover regions, we need to have more transmitters. And so like providers are now working towards building new towers and trying to cover as much as possible and make sure that this technology is actually available. And of course, there is another challenge, and we need also more 5G enabled devices. So that's the other side of the coin. We need the infrastructure on one side, and on the other side, we need the devices that need to be 5G enabled. We just know, for example, that Apple only in October of 2020 released iPhones that are 5G enabled. So this shows already that the technology is there, but not fully there. It will take probably like another couple of years before we actually see a massive impact for the 5G technologies. This delay, however, has a little bit of like a positive connotation, like a positive consequence. And it is the fact that the slow rollouts is also allowing companies to do things right, especially from the point of view of security. So that's a very important consideration to make. We need secure devices. So the slow rollout is allowing providers to address the security concerns that 5G is exposing right now.
So let's touch on that. There's a lot of concerns and in some cases myths out there about 5G. And let's talk through those sort of one by one. So the first thing I want to talk about is people think that there are health hazards associated with 5G and the microwaves flying throughout the air and other things like that. Can you comment on that?
Sure. That's a lot of discussion has happened around this topic. So the scientific consensus is that 5G technology is safe. I think a misunderstanding of 5G technology has caused all these conspiracy theories claiming that it can have adverse effects on human health. But a lot of studies have already been done, and it has been proven that the radiations emitted by 5G devices and towers are really very similar to what happens in the previous technologies like 4G and 3G. So there is probably really no health issue. There was even a conspiracy theory that has gone around Europe in the past few months saying that COVID-19 was a consequence of 5G technology. Of course, this was totally false. There is no foundation for this claim. So I don't think there is any concern for health according to medical studies that have been conducted.
All right, next let's move into something that is a real concern that needs to be addressed is what are the security implications of 5G, right? Especially as we talk about the Internet of Things and so many more devices out there. What does this mean for the security model that we have today, and how should companies think about it differently?
Yes, security is actually a real concern. So as always, like any new technology, I just mentioned before, quantum computing is a technology that has security concerns, is causing security concerns. Cloud computing opened up new security problems to address. And that's why we're working on confidential computing, for example, in Flare. When it comes to 5G, as I mentioned, these security concerns might have a credible foundation. The number one concern is that the rapid growth in the number of IT devices connected to 5G networks is increasing the chances of distributed denial of service attacks. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about billions of devices all of a sudden being connected, interconnected with each other. So it's likely, unless things are done properly, it's likely that attackers might exploit this situation and inject into the network devices that saturate the network with high demand, causing other devices to become idle and to be prevented from connecting properly. This is a distributed denial of service attack. The other concern is that not all manufacturers are prioritizing cybersecurity. We have really very many low-end smart devices, billions of devices that are connected, and each one of them is a possible breach point. So we know that security, this is like a very famous saying, security is like a chain, and the strength of this chain is as much as the strength of the weakest link, the chain. So now that we have, for example, let's take a smart home with smart TVs, door locks, smart refrigerators, smart speakers, and even a thermometer for a fish tank. Like all these things become connected with each other. A vulnerability in one of these devices can actually cause a vulnerability in the entire home. And the same thing, of course, applies to an office. Another concern from a security point of view is that, of course, all these networks require constant monitoring. But the fact that there is now so much bandwidth and so much, so many devices connected at the same time and very low latency, which are all great things, but this is now causing a strain on the security monitoring. And there is one more thing that is a concern and should be addressed. So 5G actually has done a lot, in terms of security. For example, there are high encryption standards involved in 5G communications. But at the same time, there is some information that is communicated in the clear. For example, the device type, and in some cases, the device location. Attackers might exploit this non-encrypted information that is communicated in the clear to refine their attacks. Or in some cases, once you have enough of this data, you might even identify who the owner of the device is. So these are confidentiality violations, and these are really important things to address.
There was a lot in there, and if I were to recap a lot of that for our listeners, you could think about, security always needs to evolve the way that attackers always evolve with every new technology out there. Again, let's go back 30 years, and viruses were always a thing, and then as computers became networked, you didn't have to pass it on a disk. You could pass it through email or on a web link or things like that as well. And it became that much more important for applications and systems to address vulnerabilities during the point of design, as opposed to remediating them after the fact, right? And things like that. And 5G probably basically is, I think what you're saying is that all of a sudden now, that point of vulnerability is not just a web application or a website that gets tons of attention and lots of design work and security architecture and everything else like that, but rather all of these IoT devices. And it's incumbent upon the manufacturers to ensure that they are building security in up front, and that they're using things like trusted hardware and confidential computing, you mentioned, and things like that to ensure that's right. But I think it's fair that companies need to be aware that each of those IoT devices does create another vector for entrance of vulnerabilities, and need to be aware of that. Is that fair?
Absolutely, you're right, Anish. Security is one of those disciplines that cannot be considered as an afterthought. It should be taken care at the design time, as you mentioned.
Yeah. The last thing I want to talk about, which is a concern for a lot of people, is data privacy. And obviously, with the growth in things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, biometrics, et cetera, there's a lot more data available on individuals, on companies, and things like that. How should people think about the impact on privacy that 5G is going to have?
So 5G is only going to make things worse in a sense so we already have privacy concerns today with 4G or even with wired networks, but with 5G, because of the ability of 5G to connect many more devices, we're talking about billions of devices. The risks of privacy violations are becoming much higher. The fact that cars will be able to communicate with each other, for example, like the position of cars will be tracked. Everything is like going to become like a massive explosion of data and data storage. So I think it's very important to make sure that each company takes confidentiality very seriously. And again, security cannot be considered an afterthought, and confidentiality is a branch of security. So it's important to make sure that data is anonymized in a way that it can still be useful, because the reason why data is stored is most of the times to do artificial intelligence on the data. So data has to be anonymized in a way that it is still useful, but not enough to violate confidentiality and privacy. And most of the times, of course, data has to be encrypted. And at JPMorgan Chase, we're working also in collaboration with the AI research team led by Manuela Veloso on homomorphic encryption, which allows operations to take place, for example, artificial intelligence to take place on encrypted data. The data doesn't even need to be decrypted, and you can still infer useful information from the encrypted data without violating confidentiality. So we want to be at the leading edge when it comes to confidentiality and privacy, because these are important requirements that we want to enforce for our employees, but also for our customers.
So a lot to think about here, right? And yeah, there's some risks, right? But overall, the opportunity, more than significantly outweighs the risks. And the risks all seem manageable from that point of view. We have to address those, right? But what should be top of mind, both for technologists and business owners, in terms of what 5G can do for them?
Anish, I totally agree with you that when it comes to new technology, there is always like risks and uncertainties, but that doesn't mean, of course, that we have to abandon our effort to evolve. Technology is evolving. We shouldn't stop it. We should just make sure, of course, that the risks are taken care of. So we talked about 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and the 5G, in my opinion, is the most revolutionary of all the standards so far. So to answer your question about what technologists and business owners should do, I believe that it's very important that they embrace this new technology now, because not doing that now might cause a business to fall behind. I don't mean to say that we are too late. If somebody hasn't yet embraced 5G, it's too late. It's not too late. We're talking about, everything being rolled out right now. I mentioned that, say, if we see Apple, they recently just released their new phone. So we're not late, but it has to be done now, because every business should become a 5G ready at this point. And for example, business owners should consider equipping their working environments, say businesses or schools, with 5G enabled sensors and devices. And investing in 5G technologies now is, I think, very important. Let's take AR/VR. AR/VR will allow so much better interactions with customers, even better interactions among employees. Companies can save money on travel expenses and so on. So this is the time. It's important, when these revolutionary technologies appear, it's important to embrace them as soon as possible and not fall behind.
So the same way that companies first had to adapt to the internet and then to mobile, this is sort of that next sort of wave to think about, right? And it sounds like what you're saying is whether or not a company is going to be an early adopter of 5G, Internet of Things, edge computing, other things like that, et cetera. Again, whether or not you're going to adopt it now, the time to plan is now, right? And think about what it's going to do to your industry and how you want to react to that, and get sort of your plans in place now. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I totally agree. This is exactly the message that I wanted to convey. It's not too late, but it has to be done now, getting ready and embracing the technology.
Marco, thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks for your insights on this incredibly important topic.
Thank you, Anish. It was really my pleasure.
And to all of our listeners, remember, if you enjoyed today's episode, you can rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Tune in next time.